The Secrets of Middle-earth is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we discuss the hidden themes and deeper layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether in his writings or in any of the media derived from them. And be sure to follow The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And be sure to follow the StarQuest YouTube channel. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, on X, where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And be sure to get your awesome Secrets of Middle-earth t-shirt or any of our awesome Secrets of Middle-earth gear at sqpn.com/merch. I'm your host, Thomas Salerno, and joining me today on the panel are Jeff Haecker. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Thomas.
And Patrick Mason. Hey there, Pat.
Howdy, Thomas.
Hey, so on this episode, we are once again continuing our read-through of the Silmarillion, and today specifically, we are covering chapters 10 through 12 of the Quenta Silmarillion, which include Of the Sindar, Of the Sun and Moon and the Hiding of Valinor, and Of Men.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. Lot to cover today, but before we dive into that, let's do a quick recap of our last Silmarillion installment, in which we talked about Chapter 9, The Flight of the Noldor. So after destroying the two trees of Valinor and stealing the Silmarils, Melkor, or Morgoth as he is now known, escapes to Middle-earth, where he is rescued from the spider Ungoliant by his Balrogs. Melkor retreats to Angband, where he sets the Silmarils in an iron crown. In rebellion against the Valar, Feanor and his 7 sons swear a blasphemous oath and convince many of the Noldor to join them in exile to recover the precious jewels and to create new realms to rule in Middle-earth. Feanor seizes the ships of the Teleri elves by force in the infamous kinslaying. Feanor then takes his most loyal followers on the ships, which upon reaching the shores of Middle-earth, he burns, abandoning the host of his brother Fingolfin to take the treacherous paths of the grinding ice. So before we dive into Of the Sindar and give a little recap of that, what were your guys' thoughts on these kind of chapters overall, especially in the wake of our kind of action-packed last installment?
Less doom. A lot less doom happening, so that's always good. But yeah, these are interesting. I think probably, at least for me, the more interesting was the chapter of the Sindar, because you start to get to learn about Thingol's kingdom and how their alliance with the dwarves, which are cool. I'm always up for more dwarf content, so it's cool that we haven't talked about the dwarves in a bit. I think even since that first chapter where Alec creates them, and now we're kind of seeing them come in, and they'll be a much more prominent part of the story going forward. So yeah, I was definitely interested to get to them. And then the Of Men, I mean, it's a very short chapter. It's kind of tacked on a little bit, but I mean, it was cool to kind of get that intro as well, because the men they're the second children of Iluvatar by his creation. I think the dwarves woke up before the men, but they were by his adoption. So these are kind of, you kind of start to see the a little bit of an enmity developing, or a rivalry between the elves and the men here, but not quite as much as we see later.
Yeah, I like these chapters. They kind of reset the stage, right? So we've been getting pretty much everything after the reshaping of Arda and the fall of the lamps from the point of view of the Valar, more or less, from Valinor. And there's that brief interlude where they go grab the elves out of Middle-earth and bring them back and do a bad job of taking Autumno. And they grab Morgoth, but they don't get all the other stuff. And these kind of set the stage for like what's been going on in Middle-earth. And it's very fast, but it's sort of and I think it actually describes like why it's so fast. It's just because things are good, and when things are good, you don't write epic tales because you need strife for epic tales. I like all of the little bits and details you get about the dwarves and the men and Thingol and Melian, but it's less action packed and it's less story moving forward. So if you're like coming out of the last chapter, like, all right, what's going to happen next for the Noldor? It's a big, like, put the brakes on from that perspective.
I like what you said, Pat, about how you can't have epic tales without a lot of bad stuff happening, because as I continue to experiment with my own writing, I find that, like, I can't actually have things be nice. Things need to get really, really bad for this story to get interesting.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine, we wrote some stories back in college, and we realized the two of us, we wrote utopias, and so we had another friend of ours who would just come in and like bull into a china shop. He would just wreck things up, and so we always brought him in. Hey, what should happen here? Because we always write things. I was like, oh no, there should be a misunderstanding here, and this guy should, get angry and do something stupid. I'm like, all right, that's all good stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, our first chapter going into this new section is of the Sindar, where, as you mentioned, Jeff, we get to hear more about whatever happened with Elwë and Melian when we left them gazing longingly into each other's eyes in the forest for like thousands of years. But we finally get some more on that. But yeah, of the Sindar, Elwë rules over the Sindar elves in Beleriand as King Elu Thingol, or Greymantle. He and his wife, Melian the Maya, welcome the birth of their only child, a daughter named Luthien, who is said to be the fairest of all the children of Ilúvatar that will ever be. Dwarves migrate over the Blue Mountains into Beleriand, and Thingol recruits them to build his palace Menegroth, the Thousand Caves. The dwarves, in their turn, adopt runes devised by the elven minstrel Daeron. The Nandor, or Green Elves, also arrive over the mountains, led by their king, Denethor. And no, not that Denethor that you all know from Return of the King. Completely different guy, an elf in this case.
Yeah.
A host of orcs and Ungoliant the Spider attack Beleriand, but they are foiled by the magical girdle of Melian that protects Thingol's realm of Doriath. A great battle ensues between the Sindar and the orcs, and Denethor is slain. But just at that time, Feanor and his host land on the shores of Middle-earth. So yeah, we finally get to hear more about Elwë, and of course, as we're being reintroduced to this character, Tolkien has to give us several new names for him.
Can't just have one name, can you? No.
Yeah, he's Elwë, but also Elu and Thingol and all these other names and Greymantle. But yeah, I like that we have too Luthien coming in so early. I forgot that she gets brought in and name dropped this early in the book.
Yeah, so it's interesting because they call her the fairest of all creatures in Middle Earth. But they in the next chapter they mention that Feanor was the most beautiful of all of the children of Ilúvatar.
Oh. I forgot that.
Yeah, because I think when the Valar are talking about like the loss or the marring of Feanor, they're all talking about, he was the best in every way, and beauty is one of the things mentioned, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, what about Luthien? Like who wins?
Yeah, I think fair is more often applied to female characters rather than male characters, and so I'm not as eloquent enough to make to put into words the distinction, but in my mind there's a distinction between fair and beautiful, because I think a lot of times in various literature you see they say fair and beautiful, not just fair, which is a synonym for beautiful. So I think there's a difference. I'm not, like I said, I'm not as eloquent enough to know to articulate it, but I think beauty seems to more imply like the sun is beautiful, or something like that, whereas that's like you can appreciate it as a thing, whereas fair seems more human, I guess, or it's more applies to a living thing.
I like too what you said, like the sun is beautiful because beauty, it's a neat metaphor because beauty then can also hurt you because the sun is beautiful, but stare at it and you will soon go blind.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would vote Luthien anyway, because I think she has her mother is an angelic spirit.
Yeah, she has that Maiar blood.
Right.
Yeah.
And, this seems to be the chapter of a lot of introductions because, as mentioned in the recap, we have dwarves coming over the Blue Mountains, calling themselves Khazad, as in Khazad Doom, but the elves call them the Naugrim, or the stunted people. I'm like, thanks, elves.
And we did a whole episode back in the fall on their kind of relationship, but yeah, I'd forgotten that the elves don't decide not to learn Dwarvish, but the dwarves can easily pick up Elvish. So it's just kind of funny because in a lot of this, it's the elves kind of look down on dwarves, but like the dwarves are better at them at this. They can pick up this language that the elves just are too high on their own. Whatever, they're high on being elves, that they don't want to take the effort to learn the language.
Well, I thought it had put it like it was hard. It was, and the dwarves weren't super interested in teaching them.
That's true too.
I kind of got that feeling, like the dwarves have this sort of secretive nature about themselves and the places they are, because you hear like rumors of where they come from, and very few of the Eldar go to their houses and everything, but like the dwarves are all about learning everything they possibly can from the elves.
Yeah, that is true. That's a good point.
Yeah, they not only learn the elves' spoken language, but they adapt those runes, and it then says they use those runes more than the elves do who invented them. The elves end up going with Feanor's Tengwar script. And yeah, I like how, too, it says that the dwarves become particular friends in the future with the Noldor because of the Noldor's connection with Aule the Smith. So there's kind of like, hey, you our like creator god, basically, like who made us.
Yeah. And I find it interesting that like you have the Noldor who have an experience of the Valar, right? They, hey, I met that guy this one time, or this many times, depending on who they are. And the dwarves who all revere Aule. And then it mentions in the chapter about the men, it's like, yeah, who are the Valar? What are they? What are you talking about? Like, what? Yeah. And they meet some Morroquendi and they're kind of like, yeah, I think I've heard of something like that, but don't worry about it. It's no big deal.
We didn't go there. It didn't sound like our thing. So.
Yeah.
And yeah, you get like this more relationship with the dwarves. Like, I like how it says like they want a price for everything that they do, but in that first thing that big collaboration with the elves and building Menegroth, the dwarves kind of did it just for the fun of it. It said that they held themselves paid just by being able to work on this place, which is kind of sad when you know what happens between dwarves and elves in Menegroth later.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it feels like this chapter is a lot of setup for all of the nice things that are going to be broken later.
Yeah.
Like the rest of this book, it's intermittent joy followed by long periods of sadness.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because you get Khazad Doom, right? And we all know what happens to that. Like, he even mentions it. It's like in the later days, it's known as Moria.
The Black Pit. Yeah, Tyr, yeah. One interesting wrinkle that I totally forgot from my last read through is that it said that the dwarves feared to look upon the sea. They really wanted nothing to do with it. Which makes sense. Their element is rock and stone, not water. But yeah, I just thought that, which is interesting because, at the end of The Lord of the Rings, Gimli becomes the first dwarf to go oversea, essentially.
Yeah, and they prize the pearls, right? Like the pearls are
Yeah.
The best thing ever, the most, and which makes sense because it's not like they can mine those, right? They only get them from the sea. Mm-hmm. Kirian's like, here, I've got like this tub full. I went fishing yesterday and I found 100. Here you go. And then the one, they mentioned a giant pearl.
Yeah.
That's like an ostrich egg or something like that. And I don't remember what happens to it.
Yeah, that one dwarf king, they said he prizes it over a mountain of gold or something like that. It also kind of reminded me, the fact that they didn't like the sea, of, I don't know if either of you have read any of the Dragonlance books, but the Flint, who's a dwarf in that, hates water. And not even like a puddle or like a small stream. He doesn't, and there's it leads to a lot of comedy, like in Dragons of Autumn Twilight, which is the book I've read. There's a lot of comedic moments where at one point they're getting chased by basically like orcs, and they have to drag him onto this boat. At first he's like, nope, orcs are not. I'd rather die, be killed by orcs than get on a boat. And they have to drag him on and haul him onto this boat. So like, I wonder if that was almost like, it's like, hey, remember that part in the Silmarillion where it says dwarves don't like the sea? Let's have some fun with that.
Yeah. Well, at least later on, Gimli is more open to the water.
Yeah,
because he rides on the river, and I guess in The Hobbit too, they escape down the river in barrels.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
And they were not happy after that.
No.
And in some versions, elves are also jumping around on top of the barrels and.
There's our contractually obligated reference to the Hobbit movies.
Waiting
for the check for that one.
Yeah. Physics just don't, work in that time frame. When you're in a barrel floating down the river, physics aren't a thing. They just aren't. So just have to remember that.
No, exactly. It becomes video game physics.
The will of the Iluvatar.
Well, Gimli also gets okay with tossing as well. So, I mean, he's a pretty open guy. Nobody tosses a dwarf. I think the most interesting thing to me about the dwarves that they mentioned is that they fight with each other.
Oh, yeah.
That there are like battles between dwarves, because the dwarves first give or build the weapons for the Sindarian elves at the behest of Greymantle, and they have them because they've been fighting each other. And you hear about that and you're like, huh, that's an interesting streak, because you don't get that with the elves, right? The kinslaying is literally the first time, you get a broad-based group of elves fighting another group of elves. And that's, I don't know, 5 ages since the elves woke up, which is how many thousands of years? Like we really have no time basis, but I mean, the dwarves have probably been only awake for an age, maybe, and they're already axing each other. Like you're like, warlike from the beginning.
Yeah, or that, and like, the lust for gold will do that, as we see with dwarves, fighting other races in later ages. There's that dragon sickness, even though dragons aren't a thing yet, but there's still that kind of like, yeah. And I'm sure there was like clan feuds too. I can imagine that being a thing.
Yeah. I mean, how many like original dwarves were there supposed to be?
There's just 7.
Yeah. 7? That's what I was
7
thinking
fathers,
too.
Yep.
So I wonder if it's the various dwarf fathers, Ours is the best. No, ours is the best.
Yeah. I wonder if
the longest beard.
The longest beard.
Yeah.
I wonder if the clan of Durin has kind of a superiority thing too, because it's like our father was first, and so you guys should follow our lead, and they're probably like, no, we'll do our own thing.
We'll do our own thing. We've got our own mountain now.
That would be a cool spin-off show or something of like the dwarf civil war or something, like almost like a Game of Thrones, but it's dwarves. Like that would be.
Yeah, that or a video game. That'd be a solid video game.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Kind of like how in in like those video games where they like put you in the civilization, but you also have to like manage its politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
Cool, like a civilization building game.
Yeah,
I know they have like Return to Moria, but but that's more of like a base building thing. You're not really involved in like, I don't think the politics and stuff. But like, speaking of new races, yeah, we also have, I think, like, besides, I'm sure the Morquendi met orcs before this point, but you really have kind of the Sindar meeting orcs for the first time when orcs and other evil creatures come into Beleriand. And I like how they say that, you know, they kind of guessed close to the mark of what the origins of orcs were. They kind of suspected, like they didn't like, they thought like, well, maybe these are Morquendi that have just been corrupted. And I'm like, that good guess.
Yeah. And I like how they're like the last thing mentioned in the list of, you know, the bad stuff started coming out around the second age of Melkor's, you know, chaining. Because I like how there is sort of a progression in Middle Earth of things getting worse in preparation for Melkor showing up or Morgoth. Yeah. It's sort of like his giant scream at the end of or right when he shows up on Middle Earth is kind of like the I'm here.
Yeah, the orcs come after the wolves, creatures that walked in wolf shapes, and other fell beings of shadow. And then, yeah, and the last thing they mentioned, and among them were the orcs.
Yeah, wolf creatures. So werewolves, awesome.
And I believe it mentions later, yeah, that those were devised by Sauron, the werewolves, and other wolf creatures, because he becomes their lord, the Lord of Werewolves.
Yeah, I know at least in the Lost Tales. I'm not entirely certain if it actually gets put down in the Silmarillion or not. But that was kind of one of his cool, I don't know, things in the first age. He had the lordship over the werewolves.
Yeah, so apparently he's not been completely idle, just sitting there in Angband for however long. And I like, too, that Tolkien just mentions, like, and other dark creatures of shadow, and then doesn't describe them. I like that, actually, because it just lets your... It's like the nameless things. It just lets your imagination go like, oh, what's that?
Yeah. What is that giant sea creature in the trailer for Rings of Power 2? I need to know.
Or even in season 1, in the first episode.
Right, they called it like a sea dragon in promotional materials or something, but yeah, I just like the idea that there's these like completely unknown things in Middle Earth where it's almost like they live either so deep underground or in the ocean that like if you ever see them, you'll see them once. And so and probably just a glimpse, and you'll never be able to describe the whole thing. So they just become these mysterious horrors, which is great.
Did I really see a mythosaur while I was down there? Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good analogy. But to fight the orcs just in time, we have the coming of the Nandor, the green elves, under Denethor. I just had to chuckle at that. You know, that I wonder why, though, Denethor in the Third Age is named after this. Well, I know he's actually named after a previous steward who is named Denethor, but it's like, I wonder why that name became a recurring name. I know that the Gondorians use a lot of elf names, though.
Yeah, like, because wasn't there an elven city or stronghold named Gondor?
Minas Tirith. There was an elvish.
Yeah. Minas Tirith is what I was thinking of. Yeah, there was an elvish Minas Tirith. So, yeah, those men just taking everything from the elves.
They're appropriating their culture.
So bad.
Yeah, I mean, like if you look at the lists of like the stewards of Gondor, there's like a steward Turin. And I'm like, that's a bold name choice.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to name him Turin. Yeah, come at me, world.
But yeah, Pat, you mentioned the Lamoth. the cry of Morgoth, which is kind of like the signal for all of his creatures to come out of hiding, which, yeah, must have been, because it says that it was heard throughout Beleriand, not just in that one place where the echoes were captured, that like everybody over that whole subcontinent basically could hear the scream. That's not terrifying at all. No. It won't keep me up at night.
Yeah. It's like the other night when the tornado was in the area and all the alarms are going off and I'm trying to grog myself out of sleep, hitting buttons, make it stop, and I finally get up and then like I make the noise stop and then I hear the actual air raid, sirens. I'm like, oh shoot, we gotta hunker down.
Jeez.
It's that like panic inducing noise.
It was really just Morgoth's cry you heard.
Yeah. Could have been.
Causing the wind and the storms and everything.
Yeah. And we get Ungoliant still like wandering around. She ends up settling in what do they get? Not Nandorgorth, Ered Gorgoroth. The Mountains of Terror. And she's foiled actually by Melian's magic. She cannot cross that magical border that has been sort of set around Doriath. And the way it's described almost reminds me of like Arthurian kind of fairy lore, because like they say like the girdle, it's not so much like an invisible wall that stops you as like a thing of like confusion, like an area of where you're just mystified and lost and you get turned around and like
you can't get through it. It reroutes you around and you're just like always missing it.
Yeah. It's like that. Oh, what's that place called in the Legend of Zelda games where if you take the wrong turn through that woods, it sets you back at the beginning?
Oh,
you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. You the Master Sword is in there. And if you didn't, and it takes you forever to get to it because you take the wrong turn and it restarts you back at the beginning. I'm like,
yeah,
my brother is the Zelda expert. He would know what it is. But yeah, like it reminded me of that. Or like I said, Arthurian fairy lore where you go into the magic fairy forest and you're completely turned around and misled. And so that's cool.
I actually wasn't sure that Ungoliant was stopped by the girdle. Because it talks about that event prior to it talks about the girdle going up or the Melian putting it out. But I don't know. Like
it says, I have the book here. It says, but by the power of Melian, she was stayed and enter not into Neldorath.
Okay, so just by her. I assumed that meant the girdle, even though they mentioned it.
Just by her power.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it going either way. I mean, to be honest, because I mean, you have an Ungoliant who's been beaten back by Balrog, so she's obviously a lot weaker than she was. And then Melian's only a Maiar, but I don't know. I kind of want to see that struggle. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a visual depiction of that. I think that would be really cool, to be honest.
Yeah. Fan artists, get on that. I'm sure it exists. I just haven't seen it yet. The orcs are definitely foiled by the girdle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's no surprise. They get confused, like, at the slightest thing, so.
Well, that's. Like, I like how it ends up going later on when the orcs wander in there. They have the sentinels set up in the girdle, like the marches of the girdle and Doriath, and that's where the warriors go to practice. Basically, you go to the marches and you shoot confused orcs.
When they need to grind and to level up,
exactly.
Go kill orcs for a couple 100 years.
Because they only drop 2 gold or whatever, so it takes you forever to get the amount of money you want.
5 XP per kill.
Yeah, I got another iron sword and iron chest piece.
Another bokoblin spear, like how great.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, and you actually get the distance. It says that between the gates of Menegroth were but 150 leagues, or I'm sorry, the gates of Morgoth were but 150 leagues distant from the bridge of Menegroth, which I did a quick Google, and that's only 450 miles.
That's all?
So you're really not that far. They're not far from from where Morgoth is hanging out. So it's like it's a good thing they have that Maiar power, even though it, as we'll come to find out, not all the good things don't last.
Yeah, I think that's Baton Rouge, or maybe New Orleans from here. Sorry, I'm doing the math. Like, how far from city to city?
Right, but it's like, that's like, but still, like, if you're marching orcs, you're probably like, oh, this is gonna take forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have the kind of first battle of the Wars of Beleriand, where it's basically Thingol and Círdan versus this army of orcs, and also Denethor from the Green Elves. But Denethor is slain, but the orcs can't make it into Doriath, the Guarded Kingdom. They can't make it into Círdan's havens, which is not the Grey Havens that we know from the Lord of the Rings. These are different havens in Beleriand. And it kind of leaves us off on that, but with also the kind of, I guess, hint for next time saying, at this time, Feanor makes his landing in Middle-earth. So you can kind of see where it's setting things up for, the next battle.
Yeah, because as we'll get into in a minute, like they can, the world is still flat at this point, so they can probably see far away. They can maybe see the fires of the ships or something.
Yeah, if there's not like a hill or a mountain blocking it, they could probably see it because the Earth is flat.
The sun wasn't up at that point.
It's important to remember. Yeah, it's still starlight. Yeah,
so you could see. Yeah, so the fire would really stand out.
Yeah, not even the moon yet, right?
No,
they're both created in the next chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of which, of the sun and moon and the hiding of Alinor, begins with the Valar seemingly doing nothing, but that's not actually what they are doing. The Valar sit upon their thrones in silent council, but Mandos foretells that Feanor shall soon come to him. Meanwhile, Manwë instructs Yavanna and Nienna to put forth all their power of growth and healing. Although the two trees died indeed and could not be saved, Telperion bears one last silver flower, and Laurelin one flower of gold. From these are fashioned two vessels, Isil and Anor, the sun and moon, and two Maiar are chosen to bear these lights into the vaults of Varda. Tilion, the hunter, for the moon, and Arien, spirit of fire, for the sun. The first moonrise and sunrise are in the west, from Valinor. Morgoth is dismayed by these new lights and sends forth reeks and fumes to hide his realm of Angband. Although that seems counterintuitive, because if you're trying to hide it, don't advertise where it is by putting all these reeks and fumes there, but whatever. Meanwhile,
they know where it is, because, or you mean Autumno? They
knew where that was. They didn't know where Angband.
Okay.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Valar fence in Valinor with the impassable mountains of the Pilori and the Enchanted Isles.
You thought it was impossible to get to us before, did you? We're going to completely unscalable mountains into ice and these shipwreck things that we call islands.
Yeah, shipwreck obstacles that we call islands. And that if you land on, you fall asleep and never wake up until the end of the world. And the only way you get through those mountains is that one pass, the Kalakiria. Yeah, and I like how Tolkien has to mention, but there will be one person who makes it through, but that's for later. And then,
foreshadowing.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. But yeah, the Valar, Feanor accused them of not doing anything about what happened, but it turns out they were just telepathically communicating the whole time. And it says Manwë wept.
Yeah, that's why I think they're so bad at speech, because they're used to talking to each other in ideas and thoughts and whatnot. And rendering thoughts into speech is difficult if you don't practice it. Sorry.
No, they can probably just
chat.
with a group. Yeah,
they have their group chat.
Their Slack channel.
Yeah, but I really like that Manwë weeps over Feanor. I think it sort of showcases, to me, it plays through the Feanor and Lucifer kind of similarity. That, the fall of Lucifer is a terrible, terrible thing. And I remember hearing a priest talk about this once, that Michael the Archangel, he isn't like necessarily going to battle gleefully and super happy that he gets to beat down Lucifer, because Lucifer's his brother. Like, he doesn't want to have to do this, but he has to. And so he does it because he does it, but it's not like, oh, yay, I get to beat this guy down.
He's not Tolkas.
Right. Well, yeah.
Yeah, he's not Tolkas. Yeah, it's like he does it, like Michael the Archangel, he does it because it's just, not because he takes any pleasure in it.
Yeah. And so you get the same feeling about Feanor, that he was the best of them and he fell. And I think in a lot of ways it may be Manwë like taking stock of, okay, like, what we did with the elves did not turn out the way we wanted it. Right, because the plan was to grab them all and bring them to Valinor, and everybody would live in peace and harmony forever. And instead, we ended up having literally the best of them, like, curse our names and kill his own kinfolk and leave our shores. So maybe we ought to take a different tack with the men.
Yeah. You can definitely see where they're taking stock and being like, what kind of guardians of the world are we if this is the fruit of our labors?
Well, it also says that too, that it talks about how they don't want to fight. They don't want to have another war with Morgoth because of how much damage it did the first time. So they're kind of having to, be a little bit more subtle in their plans. They don't want to have an all-out. They don't want to unleash Tolkas on Morgoth to go drag him out, because it'll wreck the world again. And it Balerion is not there in Lord of the Rings, so. We'll see.
When they do decide to show up, it's not good for the land of Balerion, let's say.
Yeah.
But that's for later. But in this part, I do like the description of the sun and the moon, because again, like with everything in Tolkien, there's multiple names for the sun and the moon, along with their Maiar that are sent as kind of the avatars, or kind of the stewards of these things.
What did you guys think of that? And these two new characters that are introduced, Tilion and Arian, I think they're called. Yeah,
I really liked Arian. Like that. It's just so cool. Like a fire.
She's cool.
Yeah, she is so cool that she she is not corrupted by Morgoth, and everybody else is like shielding their eyes from this thing, and she's like, "Okay, this is really neat. Like, I'm going to carry this around with me into the heavens." And
she's a naked flame without her humanoid form.
Yeah,
it says.
And not even like Morgoth can look upon her because of the power that's flowed out of it.
No one can look into her eyes because her eyes were too bright for even the Eldar to look on. So I think with Morgoth kind of being afraid of the light, like it makes sense that he can't look upon her and doesn't want to look upon the sun.
And it's a cool, once you learn about her, you understand the reference Gandalf makes at the Bridge of Khazad-dûm to the Balrog, that he's really taunting the Balrog. Like, he says that Gandalf says that he is wielder of the flame of Anor, the sun. And the sun is, of course, carried through the sky by Arian, this maiden of fire, who was the spirit of fire that was not corrupted.
Yeah.
She could have become the greatest of the Balrogs, but she did not fall to Morgoth and became this glorious thing, the sun. So he's like, you are the flame of Udun. You're the dark fire. I have the fire of Anor, the sun. Something that you guys can never be. It's an interesting taunt once you realize the history behind it.
He's like, I serve your big sister, Balrog.
Yeah, exactly.
She's like the big sister who kind of bullies her younger brother, so he can like the Balrog.
Yeah, I like the sun and the moon as sort of both the Valars kind of waking up to the fact that they sort of left Middle Earth in darkness. Like, oh yeah, we were really kind of just obsessed with us here and the elves that came with us, but there are those other elves, and then eventually the men, and we need an answer for the fact that it's just starlight over there, and the evil things are walking in the darkness, and so they come up with the moon. I like the moon, its appearance in Arda, and all of the creatures like kind of wondering at it and being amazed and everything. And then the sun comes up, and I just get this like vision of like some orcs, like doing watch somewhere, talking to each other. Oh, did you see that giant like orb in the sky that puts out light? That was weird. Yeah. And then the sun comes up, and they're like, "What in the heck is that?" Running for the hills.
Yeah, it's cool that they're fruits of the trees, or I guess the sun is a fruit of the tree of the tree, and then the moon is like a flower of the tree, of the other tree. And it's showing how they, like, even down to through to Gondor, they, the genealogy of the tree, it's still showing. So it's almost like the Gondor, they kind of honor the moon sort of in a way, because they're kind of following or are they honoring the sun? And
both.
Yeah,
because you have Minas Ithil, which is the city of the moon, and Minas Anor, which becomes Minas Tirith. That's the city of the sun.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And I love Morgoth's reaction to this. It's just such to me, it's such an interplay of all right, you stole our trees. Here's the sun. Take that. I'm like, oh, man.
He's dismayed, yeah.
Yeah, now half of the time I can't roam around, and my creatures can't even roam around. This is, man. To blacken the sky just to send my orcs out.
That's right. He needs these fumes, like less to hide where he is, but just to make sure his orcs can operate at least part of the time during the day, And
that's what, and we see that in Rings of Power in the first season of having that. That's partly why they blew up Mount Doom to make a land of ash that will block the sun, because you see the orcs, like we didn't really see it that much in the Lord of the Rings movies, but in Rings of Power, you definitely see they're running from the sun, and are having to hide their shield or put on screens and things like that to hide.
Oh, and those cool like dragon skin like cloaks that they wear. Yeah, that was neat. Yeah, and I like that that first sunrise obviously is from the west. It's from Valinor. Yeah. So you have that interest, and it was very interesting. He goes into great lengths to describe like the initial course of the sun and the moon was supposed to like mirror the way the two trees wax and wane, but then like they were like, I forget who was it Lorien, the Master of Dreams, who's like, you guys forgot about nighttime.
Yeah, it's like all dreams and all viewing of the stars is now blocked out. They're like, all right, fine.
Well, and it's cool when the moon first rises, because I have the book here in front of me. It mentions Fingolfin blew his silver trumpet and started his march into Middle Earth. So it's the rise of the moon is what brings the Noldor are here already, but Fingolfin it's kind of the good Noldor versus Feanor's Noldor, and they're first coming in, and they're going to do mighty deeds in Middle Earth. Yeah,
I think it's an interesting comparison. So you have Feanor come in kind of under the darkness of night, effectively, into Middle Earth, and almost like a thief, or like somebody who's done something wrong, because he has, and and then you have the second host show up, blowing their trumpet and then getting announced effectively by the moon, as like, no, we're really here, kind of like we're here to save the day. And then you get the sun and the men.
Yeah, it says the sun was the sign of the coming of men and of the waning of the elves. But then it also says the moon cherishes the memory of the elves. So the elves are starlight and moonlight, and the men are sunlight. Which is that theme has definitely been repeated in other fantasy stuff, where the moon and starlight is a symbol of elves. I like Tilion too, the huntsman. He's got a silver bow. He was a student of Orome, the huntsman. Yeah. So you've got kind of like, like the crescent moon is his silver bow and all that stuff. And I like too that it reverses the way, at least we here in the West, commonly personify the sun and moon. Like normally in many cultures in Europe and in the West, there's a sun god and a moon goddess, and then going all the way down to, brother sun and sister moon and all that stuff. But it's like here it's reversed. I like that Tolkien subverts that, and we have essentially a moon god and a sun goddess, the opposite of what you would normally see. And yeah, I like too that they say the sun and moon are actually pale, dim comparisons to the light of the two trees, right? And that light, you can only find the undimmed, unvarnished light of the early creation is only in the Silmarils now and nowhere else. So I think Morgoth is still, it's like, see, it's mine. I still, So what? You have the sun and moon. I still have the Silmarils, Ugh.
Yeah. I actually don't like that line very much, to be honest. I kind of like... I like the concept of the sun being its own thing, right? Like I get it's a fruit, right? But it seems to be, the light seems to have a whole power in and of itself that maybe the trees didn't have. Because the sun has both heat and light. And I think that's the main difference. Like, I don't remember the trees really giving off heat so much as just giving off like the light. And so I think that's a big part of the sun in Middle Earth, is that it gives off not just light, but also heat. And that's a whole different kind of ball of wax that can be bad or good. But I kind of like the idea of the sun, like literally beating the orcs down. Like, it's not just bad for their eyes, but it hurts their skin. It hurt because of the heat of the fire, the fire Maiar wielding it.
Yeah, it like brands them. It's like you can't escape my sight.
Yeah, and it's sort of like the tree's revenge, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. And Morgoth himself, like, he's sending out these fumes and other foul creatures, but it's kind of like the beginning of his downfall, because his might is now being dispersed out among his creatures and things, so he's actually becoming less powerful than he was before. And I think we get more of that in the History of Middle-earth volume that's called Morgoth's Ring, where he doesn't actually have a ring, but it's described that way, where it's like his ring of power is like all the creatures and stuff that he makes. He's putting forth energy into it. And so you get to the point where it's possible for him to have a one-on-one duel with an elf and him not just win immediately because he's an angelic spirit,
Yeah. He actually gets hurt.
Yeah, where he can actually be hurt and potentially slain. So he begins to know fear, which I think is important. But yeah, as I think we mentioned earlier too, the Valar, though, even though they probably know this, but they're taking no chances this time. They're like, nothing is going to wreck, what we still have. So we've, those mountains, outlay, get to work. Got to raise them higher up, more mountains. And I like the description of the shadowy isles. That kind of reminded me of very Arthurian kind of Avalon, or like the Voyage of Brendan the Navigator, where you just go in and there's all these enchanted isles, or weirds, or like Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where there's all just these weird islands and weird stuff happens when you land on them.
Or the Odyssey.
Yeah. Oh, like the island of the Lotus Eaters. Yeah. Right. Where they go there and they just fall asleep eating flowers.
Yeah, I remember the Dawn Treader. They get to that island. It's the island where dreams come true. It's like, not those kind of dreams, like real dreams, like nightmares and stuff. Like, oh, well, that's terrible. Let's not go to that island.
Yeah. Very bad. They put Martin right on their map. Very bad island. But yeah, with the rising of the sun, as mentioned earlier, we get men, which leads to our last little chapter. It's only a few pages long in the book and only a few minutes in the audiobook, and that is Of Men, where Morgoth is now the uncontested ruler of the North in Middle-earth, and only Ulmo opposes him by gathering news through his many waters. And the second spring of Arda has begun with the first age of the sun and moon. With the first rising of the sun in the west, men awaken in Hildorian in the east. And although Ulmo took thought for these new people, no Vala came to instruct them. But the men made friends with the wandering Avari elves as they migrated westward towards the rumor of Valinor. So yeah, I like that when we talk about the three ages, the first age, the second age, and the third age, what we really mean are the three ages of the sun and moon. With the rising of the sun and moon, officially, the quote-unquote first age begins, and time can start to be reckoned properly in days and years. So that's neat.
Yeah, I like how it talks about the years of the sun and moon go a lot quicker than the years of the trees. And I wonder about, like, why is that exactly? And I think part of it is because it's the time of the men, right? And so men's lives move quickly, especially compared to elves. So you have these long, lingering years under the trees with the elves. And then, the days come, the days and nights, the moon and the sun. And then it's a lot faster because things have to happen quickly for men because they're just not around that long.
Yeah. And they talk about, that growth and mortality, because everything, all like the plants and animals were in kind of a dormant state when everything was under the kind of just starlight. Because obviously plants can't grow under those conditions, but they were kind of in this the sleep of Yavanna, this kind of immortal slumber. But now, like, growth has like accelerated because now we have the sun, and as to reference that SpongeBob episode, photosynthesis, can begin.
I like how he describes it. It's like it's heavy with the breath of life and mortality, and I'm like, wow, that's a very interesting way to put it.
Yeah,
as it harkens back to the biblical notion of breath. Typically, when you see it mentioned in the Bible, they're talking about more than just like breathing. They're talking about kind of the soul and the fact that you have your mortal life and it's tied to your breath. And there's everything is sort of wrapped up in the mortality of man in the concept of breathing. And I thought it was Tolkien did a very good job of punctuating like what's going on in Middle Earth now that the sun's out.
Yeah. And he would know, know that being a philologist, that, our word spirit comes ultimately from the Latin spire, to breathe. So soul being also connected with breath, being the factor of life. So, yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's funny, this chapter, it's called Of Men, but the men aren't really mentioned all that much in it. It talks about the growth, and then it talks about what the elves are doing. It's kind of like a summary, almost like a recap of what we've just read, because it says, and the sun and moon are here, and Feanor came, and they had the oath, and all that. It goes through basically all of that, and it basically it says everything is tied up all together in that. And then it ends with kind of describing the men and how they're similar strength and stature, but they can die more easily from wounds and sickness, and they can they don't live forever, and kind of just their differences in that respect. And we've talked before in other episodes, kind of the religions of Arda and Middle Earth, and the elves don't really know what happens to the men after they die, and it's kind of it's the gift of men that they have, that they're taken to the heart of Iluvatar, and while the elves kind of stay on, or they stay on in the world until it's remade, and we don't know what happens from there. But it's they have that gift of men, which brings them to their creator, which the elves might be kind of jealous of. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, all they know, right, is that, and they don't even know this for sure, they suspect men also go to the halls of Mandos for a time. But if they do, it's in a separate area where they're completely cut off from the elves. And then after a time, like where elves would spend time in the halls of Mandos and then be re-embodied, whereas they figure if men even go to the halls of Mandos, they just go to their own separate fate, like you said, Jeff, and like are just taken to the heart of Iluvatar. And yeah, and I've always imagined like the elves being like, they get to leave.
Yeah.
We're tied to Arda, even when we die. But those guys get to leave this place. And it's interesting that men's first sort of interaction, though, with the elves is with the Morquendi, the wandering Avari, who, like you said earlier, Pat, they're like, yeah, Valinor, yeah, that's the thing, but you don't really have to worry about it,
I think the Valar exists, but I don't know. That was like 5 ages ago. I don't even remember anymore.
Right.
Yeah. But I do like how there is no strife between the elves and men from the get-go. It's even though they're Morquendi or whatever, which are kind of, there's that sort of the Noldor kind of look down on them. Later on, we find out because they're, Morquendi, or they're dark elves. But like, there's no real problem between them and the men. It's the Noldor and the Caliquendi.
Yeah, the light elves.
Yeah, the light elves. Because Thingol has a problem with them. I don't know about the rest of Sindar, but Thingol's a Caliquendi because he went and actually saw the trees. And he's got a problem with men, and the Noldor have problems with men. But none of the elves really seem to have a big problem with them. So what's the deal, guys?
Well, Thingol has a problem because of who his son-in-law is going to be.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
He has foreseen their...
which is, it's just so very hypocritical. Like you married a Maiar. Come on. You married way above your station.
Yeah, exactly. I've always thought that was rather humorous.
We'll get to talk about that more later.
Yeah. And I like that men originally appear in the East, which is kind of like an echo of the Bible, where it's like Eden in the East. And Tolkien references, I think in his letters, very explicitly that whereas with the elves, he talks about their awakening and gives more detail and how they met the Valar and how some of them were corrupted by Morgoth into the orcs and stuff. He said because of the biblical account, he did not want to contradict that in any way. So he leaves the origin of men explicitly vague. Explicitly vague. That's kind of an oxymoron, but you know what I mean.
Intentionally vague.
Thank you. Intentionally vague.
Yeah, that is interesting, and that's something I think we've talked about too. For there's a lot of room in Rings of Power and other potential new media they could go into the East, because we don't know a lot of what's in the East, and
right.
So maybe we'll see. I don't know that we'll get an Origin of Men storyline in Rings of Power.
Please don't.
Yeah,
but we could get some like legends or tales of that down the road.
And of course, men have to have like half a dozen names that the elves give them.
Oh, it's not half. It's like a full dozen. Like,
is it really?
Yeah.
Wait, Jeff, what are the names actually?
All right, let me.
And some of them are not too flattering.
No, more than half, I think.
Yeah, let's
usurpers and secondborn and the sickly and yeah.
Let's see. All right. So they're the Atani. The Atani, they were named by the Eldar, the second people, but called them also Hildor, the followers, many other names, Aponar, Apanonar, the afterborn, Ingvar, the sickly, and Firamar, the mortals. And they named them the usurpers, the strangers, and the inscrutable, the self-cursed, the heavy-handed, the night-fearers, the children of the sun.
12. That's a dozen. The heavy-handed.
The self-curses.
The self-cursed.
What is, I don't know. Yeah, I don't, like what does that mean? Like they're cursed? I don't know.
I mean, that feels like it goes back to the Garden of Eden story, to be honest.
Yeah,
it does. Yeah, but it's like I would be surprised they would know anything about that, unless there were details the men gave them that we don't get. But one of the only really flattering ones out of the whole bunch is Children of the Sun. The rest of them, the closest you get is like Secondborn or the people, followers.
Yeah, followers. Yeah,
the mortals. Yeah, the strangers isn't too bad, but
and the strangers is because they have death, if I remember right, because the gift of Iluvatar, so they're not bound to Arda the same way that the elves are. They just show up, they're there for a short time, and then they leave.
Yeah, I like the inscrutable, where it's like, they're both kind of humanoid sapient races, but because their origins and natures are completely different, they're inscrutable to one another, elves and men. Like it would be like a human being and like an alien, essentially, from outer space. I recognize that you're sapient, that you have an immortal soul and you have reason, but I just can't understand you fully, like you can't enter completely into their inner life because you have a completely different origin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and men cannot become immortal, but we'll see some elves become mortal. Mm-hmm. And so elves can kind of enter into the human life, but not the other way around.
Well, in one version of Tuor's story, he becomes an elf at the end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's not in the published Silmarillion, so it's not canon, but I know a lot of fans who take it as canon because
I'm not as familiar with that one.
Yeah, but we'll get to that when we talk about Gondolin and him being Aarondil's father and all that stuff. But yeah, I think the reason why it didn't go into the published Silmarillion is that Christopher's like, this kind of goes against the whole thing where it's like, elves can give up their immortality, but a man being raised up to elf nature kind of contradicts everything that has gone before. So we'll kind of leave that out. So,
well, and isn't it only elves that have human blood or human ancestors? Like I don't know that any old elf can just decide to be mortal. I think they have to
half
have
elves. They have
to have a human ancestor to be able to do that eventually. And
except for Luthien herself, who gives up her immortality when she's born again. Yeah,
she's granted that by Manway.
Yeah, she's part she has that Maiar blood. She
right. Cheat code.
Yeah, she's not even fully elf. She's half elf, half Maiar.
she can change her class, So
that's the half Maiar special ability.
Yeah, she can change her class mid game. So, but yeah. Yeah, that's kind of it for Of Men. It's an interesting chapter. There's a lot of cool stuff that's packed into those few pages. But like we said earlier, these are all kind of set up. The Silmarillion is like that, where it's got rising action, and then we take a break for a while and kind of set up the next cool action set piece. So, but do you guys have any final thoughts overall on anything in these chapters?
No, nothing here.
I like how it kind of ends it in that it's okay. The rest of this book is about primarily the Noldor and the men and the dwarves fighting against Morgoth. Like that is the main thrust of this book, and I like how he puts it. It's like them striving against Morgoth, who is just this implacable Valar enemy that, even though we talk a lot about how all of this power has gone out of him, at the end of the day, they still can't beat him. And like the best of the elves at that point can't beat him in one-on-one combat. It still ends up taking, like, the Valar have to get involved again. But I like that sort of the striving and the woes and the joys that come out of that. Yeah.
As I think it's Manwë who says in one of the earlier chapters that, it brings in beauty, even though a lot of bad stuff happens, it brings in beauty into Arda that would have never been before if the evil had not been.
Yeah. Because that's to me, that's the story of the lights, right? Because you have the original lights, the lamps, which are just sort of the bright lights, and then they get knocked down by Morgoth or by Melkor, and then they're replaced by the trees, which are this beautiful, wonderful light, but it's really only just for Amon, and it's not for everybody else, and it's beautiful and wonderful, and then those get destroyed by Melkor, and so then it becomes the sun and the moon, which is for everybody, and it's, this both light and heat and life and growth, and so it's I can't remember who it was, if it was Lewis or if it was one of the other Catholic theologians that talk about, like, if you drew a straight line and then you had an evil happen and the only way to repair the evil was to make a square, God would do it. And then if another evil happened and the only way to do that is to make a box, a 3D object, then God would do it. And that was sort of like, that was what Jesus Christ was. He was the box, right? Like, we were stuck in a square. And then if there was some multiplication of evil that came after that, we'd get another crazy thing. Like, because if you're in a 2D plane, you couldn't imagine a 3D object. And that's sort of, to me, that's the story of the lights, is the changing, like, okay, well, you broke this thing. We're going to make something that's like so much better. And I do like that Mandos does bring up the fact, is like, yeah, but it's still evil. And I'm like, okay, fine. Yes. Like, it still would have been better if it hadn't happened, but it did. And so let's bring something beautiful out of it.
Yeah. But before we go, we would like to take a moment to thank our patrons, including for this episode, John S., Mary B., Mari M., Marty T., and Mitch G. Their generous donations help us to continue to create the Secrets of Middle-earth and all the shows here at StarQuest, and you can join them at sqpn.com/give. And now we'd love to hear from you, our listeners. Have you read the Silmarillion, or are you reading it for the first time alongside us? What are your thoughts on the creation of the sun and moon, or anything that we've talked about from these latest chapters? You can reach out to us by email at middleearth@sqpn.com, by leaving a comment on our SQPN social media pages, or by joining the discussion on our channel, the StarQuest Discord server, which you can find at sqpn.com/discord. Until next time, Jeff Haecker, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Middle-earth.
Thanks, Thomas.
And Patrick Mason, thank you as well.
Oh, thank you very much.
And once again, I'm Thomas Salerno. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Doctor Who. Find the show wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/Doctor Who.